Good afternoon, and welcome back for part 2 of Chanukah History and Halakhah. Last week, we discussed the history of Chanukah and especially the Rambam's merging of some of the different strands of the rabbinic history of Chanukah and the various miracles, and how by combining the miracle of the oil with the miracle of the military victory and the rationale of the revolt, the Rambam projects Chanukah as a holiday of not just rededication, but intensity of commitment, of maximal expression of our Jewish faith and our Jewish practice. What I want to try to do today is examine the rest of chapter 3 of the Rambam's Hilchot Chanukah. We mentioned last week that the Rambam's laws of Chanukah are comprised of 2 chapters. Chapters 3 and 4 of a combined laws of Megillah and Chanukah. Chapter 4 we're going to look at next week in our final session. That's where the Rambam discusses the actual laws for lighting Chanukah candles. What we're going to see this week is something that's somewhat surprising. The Rambam devotes the bulk of chapter 3 of the laws of Chanukah not to the laws specifically of Chanukah, but to the laws of something else. I'll give it away now, spoiler alert, the laws of Hallel. And we're going to try to talk about why it is that the Rambam classifies and places the extended discussion of the laws of Hallel precisely where he does in the laws of Chanukah. Okay? And these laws of Hallel are not just the laws of Hallel as they pertain to Chanukah. They're all of the laws of Hallel that the Rambam discusses in the entirety of Mishnah Torah. All of the holidays we say Hallel, all the holidays we omit Hallel. The Rambam chooses the laws of Chanukah to enumerate and delineate all of those details.
And Chatzi Hallel.
And Chatzi Hallel, and which paragraphs to skip, which paragraphs not to skip, how to say it. The Rambam has, we're going to see 10 halachot. After the first one having nothing really to do with Chanukah per se, and he situates it in the middle of the laws of Chanukah. We're going to talk about that. Okay. In order to appreciate this move by the Rambam, this placement, conceptual, categorization maneuver, we have to review the Gemara in Shabbat that we saw last week. And we're going to compare and contrast the Rambam's interpretation or reading of that Gemara with Rashi's reading of that Gemara. So if you take a look at the sheet in front of you, you'll see we have the Gemara in Shabbat, which we saw last week as one of the tales, one of the tellings of the story of Chanukah. And we're going to be focusing on the end of that passage, the part of the passage which indicates what they established and how Chanukah is to be celebrated. We'll just quickly review. The Gemara asks, "My Chanukah, what is Chanukah?" And then it gives a compressed rendition of the story, again focusing on the miracle of the oil in the case of the Gemara in Shabbat, in contrast to the other sources we saw last week. The Tana Rabbanan b'Chafei b'Kislev, Yom deChanukah Tamanya Inon, Delo Lemispod Bahon, Delo Litanot Bahon, Shekeshenichnesu Yevanim leheichal timu kol hashmanu shebeheichal, ukeshegavru balchut beit Chashmonai v'nitzchum, Batku v'lo matu ala pach echad shel shemen shayimunach bechotamo shel kohen gadol, v'lo hayabo el lahadlik yom echad. They found the one jug of oil, and it only had enough for one day. Nasa bones v'idliku mimena shmona yamim. And a miracle occurred, and they were able. It was possible for it to last 8 days. L'shana acheret kavaum va'asaum yamim tovim b'halel v'hoda'ah. And the next year, they established, and here's the key: l'shana acheret, the following year, kavaum va'asaum yamim tovim b'halel v'hoda'ah. The following year, these days of Chanukah were established and made, or were appointed, Yamim Tovim Behalel v'Hoda'ah. Festivals with Hallel and Hoda'ah, which we'll translate for now as Thanksgiving. Okay. So this Gemara not only tells us the story of Chanukah, but it also tells us about what the essence of the holiday was. The essence of the holiday, or the establishment of the holiday, was done in order to generate these festival days as days of Hallel and Hoda'ah. Let's take a look at how Rashi explains that somewhat enigmatic phrase. And now the obvious question is Chanukah considered a Yom Tov? Do we treat Chanukah the way we treat Yamim Tovim? Not really, right? The key difference between Chanukah and the other holidays is Malacha. We're allowed to do Malacha on Chanukah.
Same on Purim.
And similar to Purim. So Rashi notes this and kind of adjusts or understands the Gemara in a particular way. Va'asa'um yamim tovim b'halel v'hoda'ah lo sha'asurim b'malacha. Not that they were proscribed from doing malacha. Shelo nikvu'u ella, rather they were established only, or vis-a-vis, likrot halel v'lomar al hanisim b'hoda'ah. So Rashi understands that the Hallel and the Hoda'ah, Yamim Tovim, he says, ignore that. That's a misnomer.
It's a chag.
It's a celebratory day, but not Yom Tov. He doesn't give us an alternative. He just says it's not a Yom Tov. Rather, they made it like a Yom Tov in two ways. Number one, the recitation of Hallel, and number two, the recitation of Al Hanisim. Right? What does that have to do? How does that correspond to Hallel and Hoda'ah? So Hallel we get, reciting Hallel. What does Al Hanisim have to do with Hoda'ah?
It makes it very specific on remembering exactly what happened at that particular time.
Okay.
It's not a random.
So for Rashi, it means even more than that. It tells us when to say Al Hanisim, where in the liturgy we insert the prayer, the tefillah of Al Hanisim. We say it in the bracha of Hoda'ah, both in benching, in Nodelecha, we insert Al Hanisim, and in the bracha of Modim, that's where we insert Al Hanisim. So for Rashi, this Gemara is telling us about the two liturgical requirements of Chanukah. Number one, Hallel. Number two, Al Hanisim behoda'ah. The recitation of Al Hanisim in Hoda'ah. Okay? Lovely. According to this Gemara, for Rashi, the mitzvah of lighting Chanukah candles doesn't necessarily appear to be part of the original establishment of the holiday. In fact, there are some rabbinic figures and certainly historians who say that the idea of lighting Chanukah candles didn't become part of the celebration of Chanukah until later on, and they're rooted in this Rashi. The original takana, the original kviyut of Chanukah was focused on these two liturgical points. Some people say it wasn't until the Beit HaMikdash was lost that they decided to create the ritual of lighting Chanukah candles. Because while you have the Beit HaMikdash, you still have the menorah in the Beit HaMikdash as a symbol of the dedication of Chanukah. So it's not until we lose the Beit HaMikdash that we need to introduce the whole Chanukah lighting thing. Okay.
The two prayers are different. One is general and one is specific.
Correct. Al Hanisim is a specific prayer composed for Chanukah, and Hallel is the generic way in which we praise God, and we do it on all the Chagim, Yamim Tovim, etc. Good. I want now for us to compare how Rashi understood this Gemara with the Rambam. And this interpretation of the Rambam will then help us understand the rest of the Rambam's laws of Chanukah.
Could you just give us
Yeah.
the time frame again? Rashi when, Rambam when?
They overlap somewhat in terms of their lifetime, but they're not necessarily aware of each other's. Yeah.
That's what I was thinking.
Rambam is a little bit
Before.
after, I think.
After?
I think. I have a master's in medieval Jewish history. It's embarrassing that I don't know that anymore. Okay.
Well,
Umibnei zeh
Depends on
hitkinu.
what your area of expertise is.
Yeah, well, nothing is
We'll
my
take
area of
that.
expertise. Umipnei zeh hitkinu chachamim sheba'oto hador. This is the Rambam's. We saw this last week, but we didn't focus on this aspect of it. The Rambam's restatement of that line in the Gemara. Umipnei zeh, because of this, because of the miracles of Chanukah, we said last week, that ambiguous zeh. Hitkinu chachamim sheba'oto dor. The sages of that generation decreed, sheyihu shmonat hayamim ha'elu, shetchilatan mileilei chamisha ve'esrim bekislev, yemei simcha v'halel. That these 8 days, beginning from the night of the 25th, should be observed as yemei simcha v'halel, umadlikin bahen hanerot, ba'erev al pitchei habatim, b'chol laila v'laila mishmonat halelot. And here there's different versions of the text. Some end the sentence there, and others, the printed edition has laharot ulegalot hanes, to publicize and reveal, or to demonstrate and reveal the miracle. The hayamim, elu Hain anikrayin Chanukah, ve'en asurim b'hesped v'tanit, kimei purim, etc. Let's carefully pinpoint what the Rambam does here. What does the Rambam do with the term Yamim Tovim?
It's gone.
But unlike Rashi, does the Rambam substitute
Yes, Yemei Simcha
Yemei Simcha? So the first thing the Rambam does is he takes the phrase Yamim Tovim, and instead of calling them Yamim Tovim, he calls them Yemei Simcha, days of Simcha. How is that manifest? Probably for the Rambam through joyous eating. Now it's an interesting thing. On Purim, we have a Purim Suda. On Chanukah, it's a big discussion in the poskim whether there's an actual kiyum, is there some kind of enhanced fulfillment by having a seudah. We do eat special foods. The question is whether that has halachic significance, right? Sufganiyot and latkes are amazing, but Purim Suda on Purim is an obligation of the day. Is there an obligation to eat and to be festive on Purim, on Chanukah? For the Rambam,
Days of that kind of feast?
well, not necessarily to that intensity, but for the Rambam, it sounds like there is some element of simcha, which is usually expressed through eating,
Party.
which is part of what Chanukah is supposed to be about. Okay?
It's like that hoda'ah.
Okay. Oh, good. Then he's got Hallel, and then the Rambam doesn't say anything about Hodah. But what does he say?
Light candles.
Okay. So my question then is the Rambam here dropping Hodah and talking
No,
about a
this
new
is-
thing?
No, because, in the parentheses, it has Legalot.
Right.
Lahaot ulegalot.
Right?
Which means he's just taking it into a physical way of doing
Excellent.
it.
So what I think the Rambam is doing is taking the term Hoda'ah, and rather than saying that's about Al Hanisim, which the Rambam never mentions in Hilchot Chanukah at all, he mentions it in Hilchot Tefillah. He thinks it's a law that's just about the liturgy, and it's not necessarily about the identity of the day. But for the Rambam, the idea of Yemei Simcha, V'Halel, V'Hodah, what does V'Hodah mean for the Rambam? It sounds like lighting Hanukkah candles is the way in which you express Hoda'ah on Hanukkah.
And also what he rules out, because didn't we learn last time that you're not allowed to mourn?
Mm-hmm.
No kind
He
of-
mentions that later on. He
And
mentions
that's
that.
So it's.
Yeah,
it's
he
not
meant-
Right
only
here,
what
it
you-
says-
No, but he mentions that later on.
It
He
says
does.
it.
He goes on to mention that. So the Rambam here, I think, does a couple of really interesting things with this Gemara. He reworks Yamim Tovim into Mei Simcha. Hallel he seems to leave alone. And then the Hoda'ah for the Rambam is not a recitation, it's not a liturgical point, though there are brachot, we're going to see, but Hoda'ah is expressed through the actual mitzvah of lighting Chanukah candles each day. And so the mitzvah of lighting Chanukah candles for the Rambam is not merely a performative act to fulfill a mitzvah, it's a way of, like matzah is, let's say, or like lulav is. It's an actual way in which we express the inherent significance of the day. It's essential to the definition of the day, not just a thing that we do on these days. Okay. I want you to read on with me because you're going to see how this weaving, reworking of the Gemara then leads to the Rambam interweaving the laws of Hallel and the laws of Ner Chanukah in a fascinating way. The next halacha, the Rambam begins his discussion of the mitzvah of Ner Chanukah, which makes sense, because he already said Ner Chanukah is the way in which we express the essence of the day of Hoda'ah. Kol shechayav b'kriyat ha-Megillah, the Rambam writes, chayav b'hadlakat Ner Chanukah. V'hamadliko ta b'layla harishon mivarech shalosh brachot. The Rambam then goes on to describe the various brachot we recite when we light the Chanukah candles. The 3 the first night, the 2 the subsequent nights, the idea that if someone sees the Chanukah candles and they don't light, they recite brachot as well. Great. It sounds like the Rambam is now ready to give us all the laws of Ner Chanukah. He started the laws of Chanukah by telling us about the brachot we recite when we light Chanukah candles. But in the very next halakhah, Halakhah Hain, the Rambam now reverts to a discussion of Hallel. B'chol yom vayom mishmonat hayamim ha'elu gomrim et ha'halel. Umevarech lefanav baruch ata Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kishanu mitzvos v'tzivanu ligmor et ha'halel. So the Rambam stops in his tracks in his description and detailing of the mitzvah of Ner Chanukah. He started. If he hadn't started, I would have said, okay, he's going to talk about Hallel first, and then he'll talk about Chanukah candles. But he starts talking about Chanukah candles, the brachot you recite. Then he goes to Hallel, and then, do you know what he does? He spends 10 halachot describing all the laws of Hallel. We're gonna briefly look at them. I bolded a line in each one. Halacha Vav, V'lo Hallel Chanukah Bilvad, Hum Shemidivrei Sofrim, Ela Kriyat Hallel Le'olam Midivrei Sofrim, B'chol Hayam Shogormim V'Hen Hallel. So the Rambam then goes on to say, anytime we recite Hallel, it's this special rabbinic mitzvah, not just on Chanukah. And then he goes through the 18 days in Eretz Yisrael that they recite Hallel, the 21 days which we recite Hallel. If you turn the page, Mekomot she'osin yamim tovim shnei yamim gomrim et Hallel be'echad ve'esrim yom. There's 21 days of Hallel. Halakhah Chet. This was Shirley's question before. Ketzan midalgin. When we skip Hallel and recite half Hallel, we don't recite half Hallel on Chanukah. But for some reason, the Rambam now wants to go through the entirety of the laws of Hallel. Ketzad midalgin. Which paragraphs do you skip? Halakhah Tet. Kol hayom kasher lekriyat Hallel. When are you supposed to recite Hallel? You can recite it any time during the day. You don't have to recite it in Shacharit, which is what we do. You can recite it at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Next, Kol yom shegormim bo et Hallel mivarich lefanav. What's the laws of reciting brachot for days when we recite the full Hallel, and what's the halacha for the brachot of Hallel when we recite only half Hallel?
Same bracha at the beginning.
So we pass like that. The Rambam actually believes that if you say the half Hallel, you're not supposed to say a bracha at all. Okay, it's interesting. We pass it differently. Next, Yud Aleph. Yesh mekomot shenagu lichpol me'odcha ki anitani ad sof Hallel. The Rambam says, one more thing. There are places where they repeat, they double up the lines from Odecha Ki Anitan. The Rambam's giving us, everybody does it. And Rambam's giving us every single detail about Hallel in all of Mishnah Torah. The Rambam decides in the 2 teeny chapters of the laws of Chanukah, I'm going to give you everything you need to know about Hallel. Question number one is why? Why does the Rambam go through all of the laws of Hallel here? He had plenty of opportunities beforehand. He could have done it in Hilchot Tefillah. He could have done it on the laws of Sukkot when we recite full Hallel, and the Rambam talks about the notion of
Stands out
Simcha.
here because there's so few.
Okay, so we'll see. I think there's more to it than that. And then the other, I thought we were done. We weren't done. Yud Bet. Minhag Kriyas HaHalel B'Yemei Chacham Rishonim Kachaya. In the old days, they used to have the leader recite and the audience respond the whole way through, like we do for Hodu La Hashem and Ana Hashem Oshiana. They did that for the whole way through. The Rambam describes that earlier practice, and he does that in Halakhah Yud Gimel and Yud Dalet, and then Tetvav, he says, Zeu HaMinhag HaRishon, Ubo Roi Lo Yilech. I think that's the better way to do it, but nowadays people do it a different way. The Rambam has altogether 11 halachot about the laws of Hallel, 10 of which have nothing to do with Chanukah, really. In fact, if you go back to Halakhah Vav for 1 second, I should have done this on the first go-round. If you go back to Halakhah Vav for 1 second, you'll see that the Rambam here goes through the days where we don't recite Hallel. If you look at the bottom line of side 1 in Halakhah Vav, Avo Rosh Hashanah, the Yom HaKippurim, Ein Bahen Hallel. You should just know, Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, we don't say Hallel Fi Shein Yimei Tshuva, V'yira Upachat, because they're days of awe, they're days of repentance. V'lo Yimei Simcha Yitera, not days of great joy. V'lo Tiknu Hallel B'Purim. We also don't do Hallel on Purim, the Rambam says. Shekriyat HaMegillah Hi Hallel. The Rambam says the recitation of the Megillah on Purim takes the place of Hallel, and so we don't recite. But what is the Rambam doing? This is very strange. And then, to top it off, we finally, at the bottom of page 2, come back to the beginning of Perek Dalet, Halacha Aleph, and the Rambam picks up as if he never left off. Kama nero tu madlik b'Chanukah. Right? If you took out all of these laws of Hallel and put the halacha of Kama nero tu madlik b'Chanukah right after the brachot, right after Halacha Dalid that we saw earlier, it would flow much more smoothly. The Rambam almost has an interposition. He has like a chatzitza. He puts in a break to talk about the laws of Hallel for 11 halachot, and only then does he revert back to discussing the laws of Chanukah. Now, the Rambam was not haphazard in his placement.
It's seemingly disconnected.
Correct. I'm going to start to talk to you about the laws of Chanukah candles. Then I'm going to talk about Hallel. I'll be back. Wait for me. I'll be back in a chapter, and then we come back to talk about the laws of Chanukah candles again.
What's the connection?
So what's going on in this Rambam? So I think there are two significant points that we need to make. The first, let's talk about the Hallel fixation first. The first is that it seems as if, for the Rambam, Hallel on Chanukah is not merely a response to a miraculous event, nor is it an obligatory recitation like we have on other holidays, but that part of the essence of the days, Yemei Simcha v'Hallel, part of how these days are defined are as days of Hallel. So when we recite Hallel on Chanukah, it's not just checking off a box of something we need to do. That's what Al Anisim really is, and that's why the Rambam never really discusses it, Al Anisim in Hilchot Chanukah. Hallel is part of the very essence of the day. Hallel on Chanukah is different, it would seem, qualitatively different than Hallel on all the other festivals. We may have an obligation to recite Hallel on Pesach. We may have an obligation to recite Hallel at the Seder night. But Hallel on Chanukah is definitional to what the days are about. The Rambam says, Yemei Simcha v'Hallel. The days themselves are Hallel. So it's not a coincidence, or it's not haphazard that the Rambam decides to devote so much attention to the laws of Hallel in the context of Chanukah. it seems to be the Rambam's way of saying to us, don't think of Hallel as just a thing you say on Chanukah. Think of Hallel as part of the way in which you experience what the holiday is all about, or you generate how the holiday is supposed to be celebrated. Is that distinction clear? It's not just, hey, you got to say Hallel, or let's be on Yom Ha'atzmaut, we're super thankful for the miracles that happen, and so we recite Hallel. It almost seems as if the recitation of Hallel is part and parcel of how we establish these days as holy days, as days of Simcha. That seems.
The question is why?
So again, it would seem to be that praise and thanksgiving is what the whole day is supposed to be, what these days are supposed to be about. It's not just remembering a miracle. It's about our active praising of God and thanking Him for that miracle.
Happiness, praise, candles. Those
Right,
are the three things.
right.
That he puts out.
And for the Rambam, that's why I think he also deliberately interweaves the Neirot and the Hallel together. Both the Hadlakat Neirot and the recitation of Hallel together generate what the celebration of Chanukah is all about. It's part of how we make them into Yemei Simcha. Yes.
I see that you have, when you're coming to the Hanukkah candles, you have Aleph and then Yud Bet. So my assumption is that Aleph, Bet through Yud Aleph, at the very end.
Right, yeah.
Is also part of his dissertation on the
Laws of
candles.
Hanukkah candles.
So it's not that he went and spent more time on one than
Right,
on the other.
right.
It's equal billing.
Equal billing, and curiously begins the description of one and then embeds all of Hallel within the brackets of Hanukkah candles. Meaning that's what's interesting here. If he had just gone through all of Hallel and then gone through all of Ner Hanukkah, I think what we said up until now would have been sufficient. But the Rambam does even more than that. He kind of seeks to interweave them. And he begins to discuss Hanukkah candles, then he shifts to Hallel, spends 10 halachot discussing Hallel, then he returns to the laws of Hanukkah candles. Now,
So that's the basis of your premise that Hallel is
Both
the
of
day,
these-
just like candles are the day.
correct. Both of these things are the way in which you express what these days are about. And so the Rambam kind of deliberately weaves them together and elaborates so much on the laws of Hallel in a place where he really didn't have to, in order to kind of highlight, indeed, these two facets of Hanukkah are really the way in which we create what Hanukkah is supposed to be about. So I think the proof to this is in the last halacha that you have here, and this is also going to be the basis for our discussion next week. The Rambam, at the end, this is the third to last halacha, gives a summation of the laws of Hanukkah. Mitzvah ner Hanukkah, mitzvah chavivahi ad ma'od. It's an exceedingly precious or dear or beloved mitzvah, the mitzvah ner Hanukkah. V'tzarich adam lihizaher ba, and a person has to be very careful, scrupulous in observance of it. Why? Not because it's just an important mitzvah, but the Rambam then explains, kidei lahodia hanes, to make the miracle known. The reason why the Hanukkah candles are so essential to Hanukkah, it's not just something we do on Hanukkah, it's the way in which we promote Hanukkah. Ulahosif b'sheva hakel v'hodaya lo. And through the lighting of Hanukkah candles, we don't just fulfill a mitzvah, we publicize the miracle, we enhance or increase our praise of God and our expression of thanks. Al hanisim sha'asa. So for the Rambam, the Gemara, which tells us Hallel and Hodah are the ways in which these days were established as a holiday, for the Rambam that means they're Yemei Simcha, and the way that's expressed is through the two central facets of the holiday of Hanukkah. Number one, the recitation of Hallel. Hallel on Hanukkah is not just any old Hallel. It's not just full Hallel. It's kind of the mother of all Hallels, because it's not just, it has all the elements of other Hallels, meaning the Seder night we do Hallel as a spontaneous praising of God for letting us out of Egypt. Well, this is also supposed to be a Shirah kind of Hallel for the miracle of Chanukah. But it's also a formal recitation requirement of the day. But by kind of having both of those points, the Hallel on Chanukah isn't just an obligation of the day, it's a way in which we express what these days are all about. And the second facet, or the second feature of what Chanukah is all about for the Rambam is the aspect of lighting the Chanukah candles. The Chanukah candles, again, are not just a mitzvah, an obligation of the particular day. They're actually ways in which we enhance the celebration, enhance the simcha, enhance the hoda'ah, enhance the praise and thanksgiving that we give to God. Okay, so for the Rambam, the laws of Chanukah are not simply the things we do on Chanukah. The things we do on Chanukah are what generate the holiday itself and what was the purpose of its original establishment. I want to conclude by setting up our final shir for next week. We've got to get those tailoring done. I got a tight window.
No, that's not. It felt like it flew.
Yes,
So it
yeah,
did fly,
yeah.
but it only flew for 30 minutes.
Yes,
It flew.
okay.
It flew.
The Rambam continues, and with this
We want more,
we'll have a cliffhanger. The Rambam continues. Afilu ein lo ma yochal. The Rambam says, you want to know how precious and how beloved the mitzvah of Ner Chanukah is? Even if you have nothing to eat, ela min tzedakah, you're indigent and supported by communal charity funds. Shoel o mocher ksuto v'lokech shemen v'nero to madlik. A person has to sell the shirt off their back, or beg, borrow, not steal, or sell. Beg, borrow, or sell in order to purchase the oil and the candles for Chanukah. And what I want to try to discuss next week is kind of the extreme requirement that the Rambam here seemingly innovates. This idea that you have to sell the shirt off your back in order to fulfill, it's a mitzvah, fine, it's a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. We're already starting to see, based on the first class and based on today's class, maybe a reason for why it's so essential that we light Chanukah candles, even if normally we wouldn't require a person for a mitzvah to make themselves lose the clothing off their back. But we're going to see next week further explanation for why the Rambam emphasizes the mitzvah to this degree. And then the amazing thing, the Rambam at the end of Halakhah Chanukah, the Rambam tells us about the limits of Chanukah. And even as the Rambam promotes kind of the extreme practice of Chanukah candles, the Rambam also simultaneously dials back and says there are limits to this. So we'll pick up with that next week.
Why it's not a Yom Tov? Because I was thinking, if it's so important, I hate this question, if it's so important, wouldn't it be Halakhah Kama V'Kama?
So it's an excellent question. I think the best reason for why it's not a Yom Tov is because the rabbinic holidays, the decision was made not to make them on par with the biblical holidays. The biblical holidays have this. With Purim, it's a very interesting. The first iteration of Purim in the Megillah in Perek Tet says that they made them Yamim Tovim, and then it says they made them Yimei Simcha, similar to what the Rambam does with.
So they diluted it.
So it sounds like they made it. Remember, Purim takes place before Chanukah, so Purim is the first time that you have a rabbinic holiday, and the question is, are they going to pattern it exactly off of the biblical holidays or give it its own distinct flavor? And so the decision ultimately is made in the Megillah itself for Purim to be different than the biblical holidays, and then Chanukah follows suit.
Mazel tov.
Thank you.
Thank you, and get some sleep between now and Shabbos.
Do I look that tired?